Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zero Authority is a community of people who believe in open source and permissionless systems built on stacks secured by Bitcoin. Today we have a special guest, Zan from Onstacks or from Onstacks.com, and it's a platform for on-chain analytics platform for the Stacks ecosystem that allows users to explore everything that's happening on Stacks. So a lot of the Stacks mining is on this platform, and it really gives the visibility into the data. Before we get into some really cool topics, we're going to talk about the platform. We're going to ask Zan about Bitcoin Unleashed, and he's going to do a quick recap. It's been phenomenal to see everyone down there and people meeting in real life. But before we do that, we're going to do a special drawing here, and we're going to hand it over to Huddle Stacks.
Yeah, hi guys. We're gonna just put it up here. We have a code snippet here to share you, and it'll just run through our drawing. If you can see, I believe we should be sharing now. So yeah, we wanted to just do some appreciation for Jake Blockchain and all he's done, and it ended up that a lot of other people also really appreciate him. So all the people that subscribe to his channel and put the screenshots below, we have you here in the code. We have a list of 49 folks. So what we're going to do is we're just going to run through.
And before you run it, just a huge thank you to Jake Blockchain for all of the effort, all of the late nights that you continue to do to push Stacks forward. Thanks to Hodl for initiating this and putting up a Wasteland Ape. Thank you to Mark for putting up a whitelist for the Kongs. And I put up an Indigo. Thanks, Rafa, for putting up a Stacks MFers. And we also had a good friend put up it's not a rare Pepe, but it's a Stacks Pepe. So I totally forgot to see that. I didn't see that link, so sorry about that. But just thank you for everyone stepping in and showing Jake some love and showing this community some appreciation. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we really appreciate all of you guys and what you do. It's really makes it a community. So, with all that said, we're just going to run it through like we have here. Winner 1 will be for the Wasteland Ape, 2 for the Wastelander, and so forth. The 5th one will be for the Collins whitelist. So as we do it, if you win, I'll remove you from the list and then we'll run it again. So it should be fairly quick here. All right, so for the first winner, we have Bowtied Yak for.
Woo!
Yeah, there you go.
Where are the sound effects?
yeah, we're still learning Melon. We need all that fun sound effects there. Okay, so let me remove him real quick. Sorry, I didn't have enough time to code this like I should, where it'll just remove the folks. So give me 1 second here to do it the old-fashioned way. And we will run it again. This time it'll be for the second winner. So let's see. Who will it be for the Wastelander that Zero put up? All right, we got Token Mixer. Let's go. Okay. So let's go ahead and remove him. Token Mixer. Yeah, next time I will automatically make it fit these folks. That way I don't have to scroll through here. Alright. So let's go ahead and go for the stacked Pepe. And the winner is JackBinSwitch.btc.
Nice.
Getting to know some new .btc names in here. I like it.
Yeah, there's more coming online every day, man.
Yeah, this is great. Let's Let's see. Here it is. And all right. There you go. The crowd goes wild. All right, so for our winner 4, we have the Stacks MFer that Rafa decided to put up. Let's see who will win this one. Flash Flood. What a name. Flash Flood. And everyone that's won, I'll contact you after this stream is over, and for the NFTs that I have, I'll send them right over, and I'll get you in touch with the folks that have these. So everyone should be able to get them very soon.
Yeah, and as long as you have the BTC or the BNS name, I'll just send over the person who won the Indigo, and then you'll have to. And for the other ones, those people will send over their whatever the NFT they put up, and then you'll have to get in touch with Mark for the whitelist for Mega Kongs.
Yep. I'll be sure to send over the winner to Mark as well. All right. So for last but not least, we have the Kongs whitelist. So get excited here. And
oh, they don't have the drum roll.
All right, we got Turbo Lay. So yeah, really appreciate you guys. This is there was a lot of folks. I think we had 49 to begin with that ended up filling this out, and I think a lot, maybe even more people ended up subscribing to his channel too. So just always wanting to highlight good voices in the space and Stacks here, and Jake Blockchain is top of that list for me. So with all that said, yeah, we can. I can stop sharing, and we can dig into this good combo we're gonna have.
And one other announcement, the final one here before we jump in. And Zan, thanks so much. The Mega Kongs have their upcoming mint on the 11th. So if you don't know, I'm sure you already know by now, but huge supporters in Stacks, and good. They've been really cool in the community. So this is coming up. You don't want to miss it. But now, oops, I'm sorry. Now to the main attraction. Hey, Zan, thanks so much for being here today and letting us do the raffle for the community.
No, that was awesome. Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be on.
Hey, so let's start. Can you give us for us plebs who weren't there in Miami, can you give us a recap and just let us know how awesome was it to finally meet some people in real life? How cool were the events that took place? I was watching on the live stream like other people, and it just seemed like a ton of fun. Shout out to Diego who did the unofficial after party too, and that was so cool. So cool.
No, I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. You know, it's especially I kind of am based in Hong Kong, so after being kind of stuck there for 2 years and not getting to see kind of the families, so to speak, in terms of the ecosystem and everyone in it. Yeah, great to see everyone. You know, I think this happens I've been in the ecosystem since mid 2017, and you know, every time we do one of these big kind of ecosystem wide events where it's kind of a gathering of everyone doing everything in the stack space. It's just an energizing experience, but two, it's incredible to see like how much tinier and tinier, you know, certainly myself, but also the original core team becomes of this, you know, thing that is so much greater. And so that was just incredible. You know, I will say one huge shout out to Shannon Voigt at the foundation. For those that don't know, Shannon has organized and put on every major Stacks event since at least 2017. And it's just like a Hall of Fame record if you go back and look at it. I mean, San Francisco in 2017 was, you know, amazing. Berlin in 2018, I think, was still one of the most memorable conferences I've ever been to. And, you know, I think this, in classic Shannon style, just kept upping the bar. Fana Forum is such a cool spot. And yeah, it was just great to see, you know, again, more and more we do these, you know, there's obviously the usual heavy hitters like Munib that will always be on the main stage and people will be excited to see. But the smaller and smaller, part of the overall event that becomes, especially with, the developer stage that was just popping off the entire time. So yeah, I had, it was a lot of fun for me. That's for sure.
One photo that I saw, it was just so awesome. It was Ileana, and I can't remember the other guys' names.
Lewis?
Yeah, no, it wasn't Lewis. It was just the three of them in the room downstairs, and the guy was talking about the NFT project, and it just kind of encapsulated the moment. I'll have to bring up the tweet, but that's so cool to hear your experience, and we can, and I've had emails with you going back to 2019, so I'm so glad to and we were talking about the app chains, and I remember you and Jake Blockchain were talking about it. Then I dropped in on a Twitter space you guys had one day, and kind of reignited some of the good old memories from this old Blockstack days. But as far as building and being around too, can you just tell new members in Stacks, how has the evolution of Stacks been to watch?
Yeah, I mean, one, I think the evolution of the space generally has just been crazy. I mean, there was a joke on Twitter the other day that I was retweeting or commenting on that was basically talking about how I think this space warps your sense of time in a lot of ways. We laughed that 1 year, working full time in this it feels like a decade, and so I think that's generally true. Both in terms of very good things and maybe in terms of just the pace can just be exhausting at times. But I think that's certainly true, if not more so, for Stacks, and even when it was originally Blockstack. As far as the community goes, I really traced that back and the evolution of that, well before I joined the old core team that used to exist. That goes back to, Ryan and even the One Name days and Namecoin days in 2014. And, even when I joined in 2017, it was pretty neat to hear, I would talk to people at traditional finance firms, and they certainly wouldn't be working in crypto at all, not like a lot are today, but a surprising amount had heard about Blockstack, knew about kind of the tech. And so seeing the evolution of the community has just been incredible. My core focus on the core team originally was really interfacing with developers that were interested in building on top of the tech, being kind of that first contact and touch point, and helping where I could, and then also scaling those developer ecosystems. And the amount that I still do that today, it's one of the more rewarding things I think you can do, just because you get to talk to really amazing people all day that are just creating very cool stuff and are very passionate about their visions. From the tech side, it's been one hell of a learning experience over the years. In my mind now, I really trace the genesis of what we think of as Stacks and everything we talk about there to the launch of the 2.0 network. I almost think of the kind of early first few years as, laying important kind of R&D tech down that enabled 2.1 to be launched when it did. But so seen through that lens, the amount of distance I think we've covered as an ecosystem, only being launched for, a little over a year now, is, it's a perfect example of 1 year feels like a decade.
Yeah, I can definitely feel that just from being just an anonymous Twitter pleb for a year. I feel like that I've known this for half my life already.
Yeah,
it's really awesome.
No, exactly. And, I think I've also, it's been really cool for me because, just to give a little more background for folks I may not know. So when I started on the core team was mid 2017, I was one of the first non-technical people to join the team, I think shortly after Patrick and Gina. To kind of bring the early tech to market and try to get developers to start building on top of it. And a lot of the early years, I was doing that and kind of seeing the evolution of the space and the community through a little bit more of a Western lens. Most of the activity was in the Americas and Europe. And then in 2019, I started going up to Asia a lot, both to open developer communities out there, and to fundraise as well. And that was super eye opening. I mean, I'd never really spent time in the continent, and first things first, touched down and spent a month in China. So that's pretty privileged to have that experience. But I actually moved to Hong Kong full time at the beginning of 2020, and ended up starting my own company there. Left the old core team, which no longer exists, and started this company called Demon Technologies. So we're the builders behind Onstacks.com and some of the other things that you folks may have seen in the ecosystem. And that's been, I mean, things have been weird, obviously, with COVID. It's not the experience that it maybe would have been otherwise, but to kind of see this space through a completely different cultural lens and the evolution of it and Stacks, on the other side of the world, I think it's been an incredible learning experience as well, and one that I think gives you a good perspective on how different this technology can kind of be perceived, and how trends come about and spread depending on what part of the world you sit in. So yeah.
I'm kind of curious too, because after the whole crackdown from China, and from a Western perspective, you would even start to believe, well, since China cracked down, the whole East Asia doesn't believe in blockchain anymore. But that's probably not even the case, right?
Oh no, that. I mean, man, not even the case, and it's interesting. It's not even really the case. The case in terms of China itself is much more nuanced, and I think that was the biggest learning piece. In terms of living there for a few years is, and I think you get this distortion effect everywhere. Sitting here in the U.S. where I am now, hearing news from the other side of the world, there's always this distortion that I think drastically simplifies away nuance and tries to give, a simple analysis. And, I think you just can't do that, whether it's us looking at China or the other way, because even simple things, the amount of cultural difference is going to create nuance where it's just not possible to do that. And so even with China, right now, they kicked out Bitcoin mining, which was really the big change in about the past year or so. That was something that they had threatened to do, or supposedly done probably 10 times over the past 5 years, but this time it was real. I think that's really helpful for Bitcoin long term, and we've seen the US and Western nations in terms of the mining activity here really explode and kind of take advantage of that shift since then. But despite that, everything else in China right now is people are still working and building things. I do think it'll get more nuance going forward, but China doesn't really like the open permissionless tech side of these things. But token projects right now are still being created and worked on in China. It is definitely more of a gray area. We have 2 engineers that sit in Shanghai. But again, most of our development is software that is, like data on top of the Stacks network. And so for that, I do think, I don't really foresee an issue, near term, but long term, it certainly could be. And the last thing with China that's interesting is there's also a whole side of this that they love, and I think is being widely adopted and isn't going anywhere. And NFTs are a great example of that. China's actually carved NFTs out from their definition of crypto. They've defined them as collectibles.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so because of that, like Alibaba, I think is offering or has offered NFTs. So it's actually quite interesting. Now, outside of China, briefly, I mean, the Philippines, Vietnam. The Philippines is the biggest play to earn community of gamers in the world. The market's obviously slowed down a little bit now than earlier in the year, but a year ago, I think there was something like 500,000 people in the Philippines and Indonesia earning, something like 2 to 3 times the living wage just playing a game like Axie Infinity. Vietnam is, I think, one of the hottest centers for development around these protocols in the world, not just in Asia. Some of the best developer shops have been there for quite a while, and now you're actually getting teams that are moving and kind of launching products native there. And Thailand's trying to make themselves really attractive to crypto entrepreneurs as well. So no, it's like anywhere. I think it's kind of a mixed bag, but Asia is very bullish and very active with this technology. It's just in different ways and different nuances than you see here.
Yeah, and I know we have a large community of folks in South Korea that are big Stacks fans as well, right? So
Koreans are like OG token investors, like compared to anyone in the US. Yeah.
Well, our good buddies at StackSwap, we talk to them frequently, and if you talk to them and you don't know nothing about Asia, you'd get really bullish and say, "Wow, everyone in the world is developing, or everyone's super stoked about NFTs, tokens, Bitcoin." But then you talk to someone from China, and like, "Oh, they just kicked out the Bitcoin miners." So it is different, that nuance that you said.
No, for sure. For sure. It's yeah. I think that's true internationally as well, but
Hey, so you guys just made some really cool announcements, and I know I've been using the onstacks.com platform for a while to just look up BNS addresses that tie back to an actual address. I think that functionality is super cool, super useful. Why don't you tell us more?
yeah, and happy to kind of share my screen and go through a little bit of this. So OnStacks, the goal when we launched it, we kind of launched it for ourselves at Demon. Can you see this?
I can.
Perfect. So at Demon, internally,
And it's sharing now.
perfect. Internally as operations, we've been one of the bigger miners on the network since the launch of 2.0, and with that, I think early on we realized we needed, certainly I needed to get a much better idea and view of what was going on in the mining market in terms of making it easier to pull data from the Stacks node, kind of display it and be able to make strategic mining decisions based on it. And that's where the idea for OnStacks came out. So OnStacks is really two products, and I'll quickly go through these in a second.
Mhm.
But it's an Explorer, kind of our own version of the Hero Explorer, and what we call the Mining Monitor. So OnStacks is generally useful, I think, for developers and users on Stacks, which is kind of where the name comes from. But it is very specifically kind of with a perspective towards miners, and helping miners. And with this latest update, we took OnStacks as kind of a pretty bare bones web app and did a few things, I think, in terms of design and content on it that are quite nice improvements. But a lot of the work here was kind of on the back end too. How our version of the Stacks API pulls data from the chain, how we store that, how we query it, things like that. But I'll just quickly go through some of this. The biggest, one of the biggest kind of changes was providing more visibility into what OnStacks is for, and also our development roadmap.
Another point that why I really love what you guys built with this is, I don't think a lot of people understood that. They understood that there's Bitcoin mining, but when you talk about Stacks mining, people get really confused and they say, well, I thought this was a proof of stake because you say stacking. Is it stacking or staking? And it's like, well, it's actually stacking. It's not staking. And before you guys actually created this, the analytics to see Stacks miners, I don't think there was anything, and I don't even know who else has a visualized dashboard to see that.
Yeah, I don't think anyone does. And that's why we built it. It was really for ourselves to start. I think Thomas and the fungible systems folks did a great job kind of giving that visibility for the stacking side.
Yeah.
But again, stacking is really a nice to have for the network. It's Stacks is not proof of stake at all. Stacking doesn't actually, it's not, it's not a requirement for the consensus mechanism, and it doesn't secure the chain. Proof of transfer is really, on a conceptual level, it's functionally proof of work. It's just instead of spending electricity in a traditional proof of work system, you're spending Bitcoin itself as kind of the scarce resource. And yeah, that was really kind of why we created it.
You know what, I probably would like to mention stacking.club because they're probably the other ones that come close to this. However, and they give really good a great description of what stacking is, but it still doesn't show spending Bitcoin to mine a stacks block.
Nope. Yeah, I think, and I think it makes sense. They have an opinionated perspective on who that website is really for. And
Yeah.
just like we do too with this, I think it is generally useful. I'll kind of start giving a little tour around and some of the new features we shipped that I think are just notable for those that may come and take a look at this later anyway. But, we do have an Explorer, as you mentioned. We've tried to be a little innovative in terms of the features we've offered compared to Heroes Explorer, being able to look up BNS names, being able to kind of see it, with a specific address, mining activity, if there has been any, things like that. But so this is the Stacks Explorer that we kind of offer through this. But the key here really is this, which is kind of the mining monitor section of it. And this is where we really did a lot of work on the back end. There's a lot of data to pull and to query to create some of these metrics. But some of the things I wanted to highlight that we started looking at pretty closely when we released the first version of the mining monitor and have since improved it, are, to your point, how this shows the way that Stacks really is tied to Bitcoin in a meaningful way, which I do think is misunderstood quite a bit, as you said. And I think one of the ways you can see that is just the amount of Bitcoin that has gone through the Stacks 2.0 network since it's been launched. All time miners have spent 1,764 Bitcoins. And, this is in what I would call still the early days of the network. That I think is generally a pretty interesting metric. And in addition to looking at how much Bitcoin is kind of spent individually per block or the average over the last 100. But the other number I want to highlight here that is really meaningful is the total BTC fees from miners. One thing I've spoken to a lot of people about, and is something I still think about long term a lot, is the idea that Bitcoin security will function well in terms of properly incentivizing miners to still secure the chain once the block subsidy ceases to have a Coinbase component and just comes from transaction fees. Once all 21 million Bitcoins have been minted, and I'm not alone in this concern. I think most Bitcoiners that have kind of looked into this for long enough, none of the current answers right now on either side really feel sufficient in terms of feeling like there isn't potential huge issues to worry about.
And to go into that further, because I find those conversations to be really fascinating, Zan.
Yeah.
And this is where the conversations around what is the future of Bitcoin? Is it treated as gold? Is it just a store of value where people don't really do many transactions on the Bitcoin network? Or does it evolve into this monetary system for the globe, where then that kind of it negates the argument around the spend when the inflation decreases over time?
Yeah. I actually think it's a relevant concern no matter which of those plays out, because I think the details, and essentially right now we have no idea what the proper amount to pay to sufficiently incentivize miners to secure the Bitcoin network is when you take away the Coinbase reward, purely for securing this system without these extra kind of minting emissions.
Mm-hmm.
What is the appropriate fee? What is the appropriate level of incentive? I think that the answer to that changes drastically depending on store of value versus, foundation for monetary system. But I think what is true in both of those cases is that the use case that Bitcoin is serving needs to be valuable enough that people are willing to pay that incentive. And another way of kind of phrasing this and thinking about it is that one thing that helps with this long-term concern is finding ways to leverage Bitcoin for other uses, where the people engaging in those use cases are either directly or indirectly willing to pay a premium or an additional amount for securing the Bitcoin chain because they're using it for other things. And I think Stacks is a perfect example of that. And the number I'd like to highlight here is total BTC fees from miners refers to out of the total amount of Bitcoin that Stacks miners have spent to mine Stacks over the since the launch of 2.1. That's the 1,764 number.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that went just to paying Bitcoin network fees? Because that answers the question of how much value is the Stacks network bringing to Bitcoin in terms of paying miners to secure Bitcoin for the purpose of what Stacks does, which is layer composability on top of Bitcoin. And you can see here, it's if you do the math and convert Satoshis to Bitcoin, it's a little over 110 Bitcoin since the launch of 2.1, and so that's about 6 to 7% of the total amount of Bitcoin that has been spent by miners. And very early days, but I look at that as a really strong directional signal that Stacks long-term and things like Stacks can be incredibly healthy for Bitcoin because it gives an extra incentive for people to spend on that security. And that's what you're seeing quantified here. And so as Stacks, gets more valuable potentially in the future, if the value of the use cases it's serving grows, the amount that participants on the network will be paying the Bitcoin network for use of it, goes up potentially drastically. And to your point, that's where I think we get into this world where Bitcoin becomes something much more than, kind of a new type of commodity, which to me, would certainly be a huge, meaningful innovation. But I think it would also be a little disappointing for myself and a lot of people that have been in Bitcoin for a while, because we do see it as this asset that has much larger potential to really underlie and be the foundation for a whole new type of not just monetary, but economic system generally.
Yeah, I think it's a really great conversation. Talking to Bitcoiners that are fairly open-minded, it's something to think about, because we have this we kind of have two technologies that might be changing our world at the same time. One of them is the ability to have this proof of work hard asset that's identifiable and everything like Bitcoin is. And then on top of that, we have smart contracts, which gives us the ability to kind of create a trustless economy on top of that. And to be able to have those two work together, the sum of those two should be greater than the two separate. And it's only logical where if you have a hard asset that's supposed to be the most secure money we've ever had, it makes sense to build an economy on top of that. And to figure out the incentives of that, I think proof of transfer is probably, that's the best thing I've seen so far that people have come up with to be able to create that. So it's really great.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think the way I phrase it too is, and also being quite familiar with the stuff going on in the Ethereum and just wider EVM ecosystems and some of these other layer ones. To me, for the longest time now, Stacks has been the one project and network that just, even from a philosophical stance of system design, just makes so much more sense. If you look at every globally deployed distributed system at scale today, and my favorite example that I always use is just the internet. We haven't taken a single protocol layer, whether it be HTTP or anything else, and tried to expand the feature set of that individual protocol as much as possible. Rather, it's about allowing these protocols and networks to each individually focus on accomplishing the one or two jobs to be done by it as best as possible. And then it's about how you layer those networks and protocols together to ultimately deliver the end user experience, which is what we all have when we hop in a browser and go to a website or go online. And I think that holds that predates this space by a long time, and I think it holds true for this space too, in terms of you're seeing the negative effects of when you try to make those trade-offs and cram a bunch of different features and functionality into a layer one, and figure out how to you end up with a bunch of negative externalities, whether it's scaling, data availability, latency. There's a number of others that we're seeing folks certainly in the Ethereum camp try and solve. And to solve it, they're going to a whole other consensus mechanism, which is proof of stake. And, that's, of course, a whole other conversation and very contentious about if that really does what it needs to, because I think it's important to remember that, all the fancy DeFi stuff is great. The Web3, metaverse, play to earn. I think it's amazing innovation. I'm very involved in stuff going on there in different ways. But long term, to me, that's all meaningless to a large degree if the underlying technology doesn't at least provide hard guarantees around permissionless participation, censorship resistant participation, censorship resistant consensus and agreement. At the end of the day, these are all different ways of saying Byzantine fault tolerant consensus, which is the 0 to 1 innovation that Bitcoin brought into the world. I think when we lose that, I think there's still some innovation to be had, but you're really missing the kind of bigger picture of what can be built here.
We had a really great conversation with DY Finance. They're making perpetual options built on Stacks, and we were talking about trade-offs and the trade-offs that Stacks initially built, knowing that our chain was going to be slower on the transaction speeds, but we're open source, permissionless, and censorship resistant.
Yeah, and it goes back to it's not taking that trade-off in the same way, because you're not actually taking that trade-off. What we're actually saying is we're not going to worry about that in this layer, because if we worry about it in this layer, then we have to make potentially unacceptable trade-offs on what the purpose of this layer is, which is layering composability on top of Bitcoin in a way where those transactions and that activity, that state, settles down to Bitcoin, and that you can, a hash of every block header is included in a Bitcoin block, and you can trace that provenance for Stacks blocks and transactions in those blocks down to there. Instead, the question, the answer to kind of, okay, so how do you sidestep that trade-off, kind of go orthogonally to the problem, is the same way we think about composability. You layer transaction throughput, as needed by use case on top of the Stacks network. In the Genesis block for 2.0, the phrase "turtles all the way down" is encoded. The Hindu expression that the universe of the world is built on the back of a turtle, which is built on the back of a bigger turtle, and it's basically turtles all the way down. Meaning,
wait, I did not know that.
Yeah. No, it's a cool little
that's so cool.
artifact.
So we're actually going to have to do something with that now that we know it. We're going to have to, I don't know. So one of the cool phrases that has come up is bazat, and it's from the Stacks degens, and it's this like kind of this. I think it's like low key. No one really knows what it means, and it literally, the translation is based. But it just, I don't know how it kind of came up. It came up when Jake Blockchain was talking to them. But this like bazat and the turtles, I'm gonna have to look at the Genesis block now and go look for that.
Yeah, and I think it kind of is an analogy for the approach to system design. So once you have composability, okay, there are a lot of use cases where you're going to need much higher TPS than what we have. I think you can see that friction when you use some of the early DeFi protocols like Arcadico and Alex. The protocols work brilliantly, but there is friction, nothing to do with those teams' faults, just the block time of, if I need to do anything with those protocols in terms of use case where I need to do more than 2 or 3 transactions, that's not really something I can do and just sit at my desk and wait for. That can be a couple of hours, and so the solution to that is hyperchains and app chains. App chains are basically just the same way Stacks is a layer on top of Bitcoin that settles down to it for the purpose of providing composability to hard Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus. Any app chain is the same as the Stacks network, functionally its own layer 1, but where it layers on a feature set that's needed for that has the ability to leverage the composability the Stacks chain creates and the Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus Bitcoin creates via the same mechanism. Another way of putting it is stacking works for any app chain, because no matter the asset of that app chain, you can lock that asset up. It earns Stacks tokens, and those Stacks tokens are locked up. It earns Bitcoin, and that can all be abstracted away behind the scenes.
Yeah. Will that be added to the platform?
So app chains are live today at least on testnet, or in terms of a very early kind of proof of concept implementation. Jude at the foundation is kind of the galaxy brain around that. He's focused on 2.1 right now, as I think Euro is really focused on hyperchains. Hyperchains are similar to app chains, but they're a little, if people are familiar with the Avalanche ecosystem, it's the same concept as subnetworks there, where you basically, you need a high TPS network for, let's say, a trading use case.
That's transactions per second.
Yes, sorry. You can create a subnetwork with, an open node membership set, federated, closed. It's very flexible, but where you can make it so that that network has an arbitrarily high amount of transaction throughput. Maybe it's EVM compatible. Again, it's very flexible that you can do. And as long as the validators of that subnetwork, come to consensus, they then settle that state on the Stacks chain. And so the Stacks chain doesn't need to become EVM compatible itself. It doesn't need to, change proof of transfer to have, half a second block times. You can fully solve those problems via this kind of layered approach.
Mm-hmm. One thing that you said that I kind of really started me thinking, the second piece of, you were looking at the all-time Bitcoin spent, and then you were looking at, I think was it the Bitcoin from miners?
Yeah, so we were looking at, so every time miners send a Stacks mining transaction, it's a Bitcoin transaction. It just includes they're literally sending Bitcoin. And so by definition, it's a Bitcoin transaction. That transaction just includes a small amount of metadata, which is their draft Stacks block. Because of that, every mining transaction, there's 2 components to the amount of Bitcoin miners are spending that they have to think about strategically. There's, the overall amount, but that overall amount gets split between the amount of Bitcoin that is actually going to the Stacks network that ends up going to stackers, and that determines their weighted probability of winning a block. And then there's some amount of that Bitcoin that doesn't reach the Stacks network. It is paid to Bitcoin miners as a fee for processing that transaction. And so one way to think about this is, if Stacks miners have to pay a bit of a premium fee because they need their transaction to arrive and be confirmed on the Bitcoin chain, in a pretty timely amount of time. Otherwise, they'll miss the competition for the next Stacks block. If I'm just sending Bitcoin transactions, I don't really care if that takes an hour or, in some cases, even a day or 2. So I can pay a much lower fee. But yeah, that number refers to the aggregate amount of transaction fees that Stacks miners have paid to the Bitcoin network all time.
What, and maybe I don't know enough, but one thing that I don't think a lot of people in the Stacks ecosystem realizes that Stacks also has a halvening schedule.
Yes, and it's pretty. I believe it's in lockstep with Bitcoins as well.
It is. It is. Can you give us kind of like a scenario that you could see happening as it relates to Stacks mining and the halvening? Where is it going to be similar to the Bitcoin halvening, or is it just a little bit different since it's a gas token, right?
Yeah,
And
I
it's supposed to be inflationary.
it is. The Stacks network is I think low inflation long term. I believe the 2% might have been kind of the level that once the halvenings all kind of happen, that it kind of ends at in terms of emissions per year.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, we've kind of seen a mini halvening already, and I don't think it was something that the wider network itself really noticed that much.
Mm.
Um, it as a miner, it can potentially really change strategy around mining, just in terms of the amount of spend, how many miners we're kind of seeing compete per blocks. And
Mhm.
that's just the kind of considerations there. Mining is a purely rational economic activity. The reason people spend Bitcoin to mine Stacks tokens, it's the same reason people spend electricity to mine Bitcoin. It's economically profitable to do so. Um, when you have a halvening, the other things you care about as a miner, you essentially want to have as good of an idea as possible what the expected value of you winning a block is. And with Stacks, that obviously gets into the probability of you winning the block. And you can calculate the probability, and you can also calculate to a decent degree of confidence, the expected value. How many Stacks tokens you're going to get per block if you win a block, and you can kind of estimate how much of that, the amount of additional transaction fees you'll get. And you obviously then want to pay as little Bitcoin as possible per block for that reward. And that's in that window is where the competition of the mining market is defined. And so we've actually seen a really competitive mining market, certainly for the past few months. That can be for a lot of reasons. It can be from people using mining as a way to accumulate Stacks tokens, in which case they're willing to, pay a little more than someone who's looking to do it for purely economic reasons. But in general, when we have a halvening, the expected value per block, let's just say it roughly gets cut in half. Now, that can have a huge effect on miners, or not as big of an effect. The secondary market prices really kind of drive the ultimate output. But what we have seen just as miners around the halvening is when this happens, the mining market can get in these equilibriums where miners are kind of getting pretty competitive. The market isn't really changing much in terms of number of miners, how much each miner is spending. And a halvening basically just throws that a little bit into chaos. And you get a little bit of a reset where you need to see where the competition kind of settles in terms of spend again, how competitive and how profitable. So we've certainly seen that, but from a broader network activity side, on Stacks, it's not something that is as noticeable. Obviously, for any investors using mining as a way to accumulate Stacks, that has a big impact as well. But yeah.
Yeah, I had a question too. The when 2.1 comes out and we have some changes in how stacking works and all of that, do you anticipate that to change how miners might operate as well?
Man, 2.1 is going to change a lot. So I briefly on the side. So Demon, we do a bunch of stuff with mining. We created Onstacks. We mine ourselves, but we behind the scenes just try to do as much as we can to push the Stacks ecosystem forward, and that ends up taking the form most of the time of funding and then also partnerships. And there are a bunch of partnerships that in some cases have been announced, but the actual technical integration going live, once 2.1 comes on, they'll be there. And especially a lot of bridges for Stacks into pretty much every other major layer one. There, Allbridge was a partnership we did a couple months ago. That team has pretty much built it, but it's waiting for, there's some big improvements with 2.1 with clarity specifically, and the ability to do signed structured messages with Clarity that I think is going to be huge for expanding the feature set of the network. When it comes to 2.1, and I'll actually briefly go back to share my screen because this is kind of shows what we'll kind of be able to do with that. Clarity is going to be really big. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, I just put it on the screen here.
Perfect. Here we go. So, this recent release of Onstacks was really adding some new mining data, a lot of upgrades to the back end, and we do actually hold a whole documentation section on the site now for miners that should be really useful just in terms of understanding mining, getting started mining, spinning up a Stacks node, Bitcoin node on a cloud server, things like that. Mm-hmm. But what we're starting to do a lot of development for is preparing for when the 2.1 upgrade is live. What that will allow us to do is, Stacks mining pools is something I think that's come up in the community quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And the reason we haven't really done any of those so far is you can't do it in a non-custodial way pre-2.1. What that means is, if we were running a pool, for instance, and you guys wanted to join, you would really just send us Bitcoin, and then we would use that Bitcoin to mine and return you the relevant profit. And that really doesn't add any value to the network at all. It doesn't make mining more secure. It doesn't really functionally put more miners on the network. Post 2.1 though, you will be able to create software that enables non-custodial Stacks mining pools in ways that are actually quite a bit better for network security and do kind of help the decentralization of the mining market. And so we're doing a lot of work right now to prepare for that. You can see, this is just kind of the high level roadmap, and there are some cool extra features we'll add here, like login with Hero Wallet, which you can then use to set up like miner address watch lists. You can create a notification service for yourself at your mining address if you win a block, if you lose a block, if your Bitcoin wallet's running low, for instance. But the bigger work is going to be going into the Stacks node software and separating the mining software out from the Stacks node software. Right now, it's part of the same software package, and that limits our flexibility in terms of the tools around mining that we can offer. Once that the node and running a Stacks node is separate to the software and package for running a Stacks miner, one of the things we'll do is we had a desktop mining bot we created a long time ago. We're going to be able to basically offer a Stacks mining bot as a web app, potentially hosted along on onstacks.com. You'll come and you'll be able to spin up the web app. All you'll have to do is connect the Stacks node, connect a Bitcoin node, and have your Bitcoin wallet address that's funded for mining, and you'll be able to do that right through your browser.
That's gonna be killer.
Yeah, so I think the addition of that and non-custodial pools will be huge as well, because we already have software. We already had kind of the design done for how we want to build software to enable those kind of pools. Mm-hmm. And I think once we have that, we may not run pools ourselves just because it gets a bit tricky as a private LLC to do that regulation wise. But, for one, I'm going to go around to every single stacking pool, Frieger pool, Xverse, everyone else, and basically get them to integrate this mining pool software, because it just makes so much more sense in terms of another flexible potential avenue for yield for that system. But yeah.
Yeah, that really does sound like it's going to be game changing. The more folks that can get on and be able to mine straight with their Bitcoin, the better is how I view it. And so that's really awesome.
Agreed.
Yeah. So we have 3 minutes left here. Huddle, do you have one last question?
Yeah, I think the just the one thing is what to expect from you guys coming up, Zan, and little overview, maybe what you are envisioning tackling for this year. I think you went into it a little bit there with the screen share, but yeah.
Yeah. And also, do you envision other people create different sites to show mining data?
Yeah, I'll tackle that first. I would hope so. This isn't a market we're looking to corner. Actually, I think what we'll probably get to on our roadmap, that it may not be listed there, but it's certainly on our internal one, is open sourcing more and more parts of OnStacks as this goes on. I think the other reason, in addition, that we also made OnStacks in terms of the Explorer side is because I think you need more and more people creating this type of enabling infrastructure. And we noticed an issue where, Heroes Explorer and their API is incredible. But because it's the only one, no matter how good of a job they do, they're just getting slammed with requests. And I think we've seen that cause some network latency, over the past year. And that was, why we created our version of the Explorer. And, our version has a lot of the same stuff, but also has a slightly different perspective on it. And, I would love to see more and more of that, which is actually why, we want to open source, the Explorer, for instance, to make it really easy for people to spin up their own version of that, and then, tweak it to, ultimately show the data in any way that they find most valuable. So I think that's definitely on the roadmap going forward. Aside from the work we're doing on the mining software and kind of ideally offering a miner through a web app at some point, maybe towards the end of the year. Yeah, I'm generally focused on two things and excited about them in the space. And that's one part. So one is expanding the feature set and reach of the Stacks network. That I think we're seeing happen a ton with partnerships, not just the ones we've done with the bridge providers, for instance, but the recent MoonPay announcement. All of that is massive, and I think opens up a lot more possibilities for what I still think is the killer use case or early killer use case of the Stacks networks in some ways, which is stacking. Not just as a way to earn Bitcoin, but stacking as a novel funding mechanism. I think Citycoins is a great early example of the type of innovation that can create. And then the second thing is also just bringing in more resources into the space. I think there's a lot of people doing that on the technical side, and I think one of the more meaningful things we can do too is just more resources in terms of capital too. We've seen, Munib do that with the trust machines raised, the recent Odyssey announcement. You're going to see, I think, some other announcements potentially later in the year around some other different types of funds, ecosystem funds, but just anything that allows, the folks building on top of this to more and more focus just on what they're building and making that amazing and finding product market fit with it and being able to lean in on that. Resources, that allow them that freedom to really focus on that, I think is the key. And, I think we are seeing the progress being made there between, so we're also an LP in the Stacks Accelerator. And so between, cohort one, which was pretty amazing to see to begin with, I mean, apps like Arcadico and Alex kind of coming out of that. But this second cohort is, looking even more so. And I think it speaks to the progress being made just in the ecosystem as a whole. So.
Yeah, well, this was phenomenal. I'm so glad finally have got you on, Zan. I've followed you for a while, man, and just been so just thankful for all of the knowledge that you've been sharing over the years, man.
Oh, dude, thank you for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure, and happy to come on again. I've stuck around as long as I have, but mainly because I love these conversations and going deep with people that are willing to do so. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, really appreciate you taking the time and spending your Friday afternoon or evening with us. So, really great pleasure.
Oh, yeah, Mitchell. And
Mitchell, yep.
I think I know the gentleman on the right, but no, my pleasure. It was nice to have a little bit of a calmer afternoon between Bitcoin Unleashed and Bitcoin 2022. I'm a little too old, I feel like, for these.
Oh, you can't say that. No.
The excitement carry. The mind is willing, but the body is something else.
I think Huddle Stacks and I can agree with that one. It takes a long time to recover nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. But
That's for
Uh,
sure.
but don't forget, if you guys are watching this on Monday, we're going to have a really cool conversation with Unlock Protocol. And the next live stream, we're going to have Steve Kim from A41 Ventures. So this is, we
Steve's a
love
Steve is a
Steve.
great guy. Definitely make sure, we barely touched on the Korean community and just the culture of crypto and Web3 in Korea on this call, but definitely get into it with him. Yeah, he's a really knowledgeable guy and should be a good conversation.
That's a great idea. Thank you for that piece of advice, Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, you guys have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks so much for having me again.
Thank you,
Take
Zan.
care.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, Hopstacks.
Thank you.